You know who else hasn't missed yet?
Well, there's a couple answers to that question. First off, you're going for the Vikings. They're
The Vikings
undefeated.
haven't missed.
Yep.
There's a specific Viking that also hasn't missed yet.
Knock on wood.
Will the Thrill.
Will the Thrill is here. He's not coming anymore. He's here. But yeah, the Vikings are undefeated. And I feel like I said it a few weeks ago. I feel like Ricky Bobby. I don't know what to do with my hands or with myself because, good grief, like nobody expected this. They figured... most people figured the Vikings would win 5, 6, 7 games total, and they're 5 games in, and they haven't lost yet, and that's awesome. But we got all the naysayers and all the people out there that are apparently experts and know what they're talking about, and they're saying, I don't know, I still don't believe in this team. But on the other side of that, you're still getting some power rankings where the Vikings are number 1, and I mean, well-deserved on some point, but I still don't know what to think of it. Like, I hope they keep going, but you got to know at some point they're going to lose a game, right?
Yeah, definitely. And this last weekend of NFC North football didn't help the Vikings, really. It could have significantly helped the Vikings because all 3 of the other North teams played while the Vikings were on their bye in week 6. And, I was kind of hoping, wow, maybe the Bears will lose or maybe the Packers will lose. Didn't really have high hopes that the Cowboys could beat the Lions.
Yeah.
But, there's always that shred of hope too. And no, none of that happened.
Yeah.
All 3 teams won. All 4 teams in the NFC North now have a winning record. They're all above 500. And, that's kind of been the big talker in sports world today, I think, is just the NFC North. They're hot. And not only do all of those teams have a plus 500 record, but all 4 of them lead the league in point differential.
Yeah,
right
1,
now.
2, 3, 4. Yeah, the top 4 teams are the NFC North.
It's crazy. It's absolutely nuts. And I can't remember a time when this division has been this strong. There's always been the bottom feeder, the Lions or the Bears, or the Vikings have been down and the Packers have just, obliterated everyone, But man, it's going to be a tough division.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I have this stat right. And this is not any groundbreaking stat. Everybody else has already said this, but I think this is the only time or the first time since the current divisions have been created in like the early 90s that every team in a given division had 4+ wins after week 6, which is kind of the most Viking thing ever to be this dominant so far, and then also like only be up by 1 or 2 games on the division because everybody else is playing pretty well against the teams they've played, which you pointed out. The rest of the NFC North haven't really played a bunch of talented teams so far.
I think this deserves some conversation here because I was perusing Twitter, and not that everything you read on the internet is true, but from some verifiable sources.
Wait, what? Everything you read on the internet isn't true?
Yeah.
I don't believe you. Maybe if you wrote that on the internet, I would believe you.
Everything that I say is true.
Okay. All right. Oh, man.
Anyways, I sent you a few things from some verifiable sources. Detroit, 0-1 against teams that are above 500.
Okay.
Chicago, currently.
Okay.
Chicago, 0-1 versus teams that are above 500. Green Bay, 0-2 against teams that are above 500. So combined, those 3 teams are 0-4. Wait, how many games have the Vikings lost?
Vikings have lost 0 games.
They've lost 0 games, which means they are 2-0 against teams above 500. That would be the 49ers and the Texans. Well, I guess the Packers would be in there because they are above 500.
I don't think
technically.
The 49ers are 3-3 right now.
They're
so
3-3.
They're at 500.
So it would be the Texans and the Packers.
Yep.
But another interesting stat is how the teams that the Vikings and all the other teams in the North have fared against the other teams, right? Like I don't know if you're aware, you're wearing our alma mater sweatshirt right now, Bettendorf Bulldogs. Iowa high school football has moved to an RPI system. And so they look at, of course, your wins and losses, but then they look at your opponent's wins and losses, and then they look at your opponent's wins and losses to factor in all that stuff. And Bettendorf's ranked number 1 in the state right now, 5A. So
everything's coming up. The Skol Hop, everything's working well for us right now.
But anyways, when you look at the NFC North teams, the combined record of the teams that these teams have defeated, it's pretty telling, I think. The teams that the Vikings have defeated are 16-12.
Yep, that's pretty good. Above 500.
The teams that the Lions have beaten, 9-13.
Oh, okay. Not quite as good.
The teams that the Bears have beaten, 4-16.
They're awful.
And the teams that the Packers have beaten, 6-15.
Okay.
So it would appear to me that the Lions, the Packers, and the Bears have really only beaten subpar teams, and they haven't had a true test yet. Does that seem accurate to you?
Yeah. And the caveats to those are, number one, you can only beat the teams that you're going against.
True.
So yeah, we can say this and we can feel better about this, saying the rest of the NFC North haven't really played tough competition so far, but that's not their fault, because the Vikings will play these same teams. That's how these divisions work. Everybody in a division, for the most part, plays the same other teams throughout the season. Aside from a couple other things that are based on how you finished in your division last season. But the Vikings will face a similar schedule to all the rest of the NFC North teams. So it'll balance out. The Vikings will they'll get, in theory, a little bit of an easier schedule here, starting, I think, after this week 7 game against the Lions. In theory, on paper, things kind of ease up a little bit. So yeah, number one, you can only beat who you're playing. So it's not their fault that the teams they played don't have the greatest record outside of those games. But also, I mean, it does make us feel better. For me, that kind of a stat makes me feel better about the Vikings, as they are actually good. Like, they're not the ones beating up on, or even, getting slight wins against these awful teams or lower teams. They're actually beating teams that are decent. And I'll include the Packers on that. Like, the Packers win was a nail biter for a little bit. And the Vikings did pull it out and they won that one. So the Vikings have a few quality wins so far. And for me, that just means, okay, this team has something. There's something there. They're not fluky. They haven't gotten some crazy defensive touchdowns out of nowhere. They've gotten them, but it hasn't been the reason they've won every single game. It just makes me feel good about the team.
Yeah. I also think another minor stat that I looked at, and again, stats are stats. They don't tell the whole story. But when it comes to the point differential, now I'm not going to be able to find it quickly. Obviously, we've already covered the fact that the 4 NFC North teams lead the entire league in point differential. The Vikings are second in the league behind the Chargers, I'm pretty sure, in points allowed on defense. And the other NFC North teams are pretty far down on
I do
the
have
list.
it listed in our little outline as far as just the Vikings, or just the NFC North point differential.
Yeah, but I'm just talking about the points against category.
Sure.
So they are second in the league in points allowed, which means the defense, and we've known this, we've seen this through 5 games, the defense has been the signature of this team. The offense has played really well, and the offense has a lot of great weapons. Obviously, the league's best wide receiver in Justin Jefferson. We now have a running back, Aaron Jones. Hopefully he's healthy.
Yeah, if he can stay on the field.
Jordan Addison seems to have recovered well from injury and will avoid suspension for at least this season.
Yeah.
TJ Hawkinson's on his way back. The offensive line is playing really well. All of that to say, the defense is still the key part of this team, and I don't know that the other teams in the North have that stout of a defense. The Packers don't. They gave up 28 points to the Vikings in the first half. Now their offense clawed their way back.
Yeah.
And
to be fair, for that Vikings-Packers game, yeah, they gave up 28 points in the first half, but then they also only gave up 3 points in the second half against a team that was trying to decide whether or not they were going to, coast or actually put the foot on the gas. But anyways, I do want to be careful about this, because I don't think either of us are saying, yeah, the rest of the NFC North is garbage.
No.
Yeah. I think there are some good teams. And again, I think you're agreeing with me on this. The Packers are pretty good. And Jordan Love on one bum knee is actually not looking awful. It was a cool highlight play, but it was a lot of luck, I would guess. If you saw that Dobbs touchdown where he just kind of like out of nowhere threw it up, and Dobbs, I mean, they scored a touchdown. You can only...
And Dobbs made a good play on that ball where he kind of shook the defender off of him and then was able to get the basket catch kind of right there, and then had the awareness to go, oh, there's the goal line. Touchdown.
Yeah. But it wasn't like... I don't think that kind of a play is a repeatable thing.
That's not how they drew it up.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
Sure.
And I will say the Bears, the last 2 or 3 games, Caleb Williams has started to look like he's figuring a couple of things out. And then the Lions, their last 2 games, they've kind of dominated.
Oh, they've routed. Who did they play 2 weeks ago?
It was the Seahawks. And that was the game that Goff had. He didn't have an incompletion. He was like 18 of 18 or something like that. So all of this to say, the Skol Hop fully recognizes the other 3 teams in the division. They're not garbage teams. They're not just getting lucky. It's not just, they got some random fumble return for a touchdown 10 times, and that's why they won the game. I think what we're also saying is the Vikings seem to be a more well-rounded, more put together, and more consistent team. And that will flush itself out and prove itself as these other NFC North teams start playing a harder schedule, and the Vikings obviously keep going, and what I've just said is going to be a little bit of a softer schedule for a minute.
I think another interesting aspect of the NFC North specifically is when each team has their bye week. Detroit had their bye week last week, week 5. The Vikings have theirs this week, week 6. And then I forget, I think it's the Bears are next week or 2 weeks from now.
I don't have any idea. So
I can't remember. I looked it up. I think the Packers are week 10, and then the Bears are like week 7, 8, somewhere in there, maybe week 8. Because there are a few weeks in there where the league built in, there are 0 bye weeks, and all 32 teams are playing. But anyways, I think the bye week could factor in, and I think these early bye weeks for some of these teams could come back to haunt them, including the Vikings in those, later week 15, week 16, week 17 games when injuries are starting to pile up and your depth starts to wear thin, and you don't have the guys to go out and play.
Yeah, exactly.
So it'll be interesting to see, and there are always those divisional games at the end of the season. The league has prioritized that to increase the rivalry, increase the entertainment. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, but it's also nerve-wracking.
It really is. I think last season the Vikings finished off Lions, Packers, Lions, and this season it's a similar ending to the season. I like it. I think it's just a smart thing the league has done just to keep teams playing their starters longer. There was just a pretty big Hail Mary at the end of the first half of the Monday Night Football game, and I'm not sure what happened. Rodgers looked like he just threw a deep bomb for a touchdown, but the ball hit the ground.
They just ruled it a touchdown.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
This is what you want to hear on a podcast 1 to 2 to 3 days after a game is finished. But it looks like Allen Lazard might have just caught a deep bomb Hail Mary touchdown at the end of the half. And I don't know. I'm glad I'm not an NFL ref. Anyways, I forget what I was saying, but it is nice. The Vikings, I think they lead the league in point differential, which, if you remember, this is another stat that makes me feel good about the consistency of this team. KOC's first year as the head coach, 2022 for the Vikings, with largely the same roster that Mike Zimmer ended his Vikings career with. KOC's first year, he led them to 13-4 record, and their point differential that whole season was -3, which means they scored 3 less points than they allowed.
Yep.
And they won 13 games. Now, that also did end with a pretty, flat tire, depressing playoff game against the Giants. But that's for another time. Anyways, with a 13-4 record, with a -3 point differential, the Vikings currently have a +63 point differential. That tells you this team's a little bit better, less fluky. more consistent. Again, I know they're going to lose a game or two or three or four, or however many, but they're good.
And we've seen those down moments, right? We've seen like the second half against the Packers. I mean, for Pete's sake, lots of things that happened in London against the Jets. It was just like, what happened? It seems like we just all of a sudden forgot how to play football, and we can't move the ball, and it's punt, 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 or it's turnover, then punt, then whatever. And I think you're right. The Vikings will lose a game at some point. I think you even tweeted this out on our account earlier today.
Yeah.
Like, I think you just said, like, it'll be okay. Like, this should be expected. No one's really gone undefeated in this league since the Patriots did it in, what was it, 04? Or
oh, no,
it
was
later
like
than that? 12?
We should know this. It was
Whatever.
It was later.
I don't care about the Patriots.
Like 07 or something like that.
Okay, I was kind of close with 04.
Yeah, I mean, you weren't way off. It wasn't 20 years later.
Notoriously lost to the Giants, to Eli Manning in the Super Bowl, which I think is really funny. But anyways, we should expect the Vikings to lose at some point. It'll be frustrating. It'll be a tough episode to talk about because there'll be a lot of glaring issues, I'm sure, in that game that we're like, if they just would have done this, and if they just would have gone back to what they did against the Texans or against the Niners or whatever, we'll be the armchair GMs and the armchair head coach in that episode, and really lay into Kevin O'Connell for all the things that he could have done in that game. But
and if you want to hear how that sounds, go back and listen to the first 6, 7, 8 weeks of the Skol Hop last season, because that's what it was. What was their record at this point in the season last year? Had they won 2 games yet?
I don't even remember.
I think they might have won 2 games by the end of week 6 or something like that. That's something we can easily look up. But yeah, I mean, this team is good. Injury bug will hit them at some point. They'll get just beat. They will lose a game. It's going to happen. And the thing that's making me feel better about saying they will lose a game is that they're scoring points. The defense is stout, but it's not unsustainable. I think the biggest thing is the strategy of the game and KOC figuring out how to close out a win and not have that mid-game slump that we've seen the last handful of weeks.
Keep the pedal to the metal.
Yeah.
Kind of like what you saw with the Lions yesterday playing the Cowboys. Like, they were putting linemen out there, not just Dan Skipper, but like these guys were, declaring as eligible, and they were trying to get them touched. Like, they were getting ultra cute. It wasn't just like, let's run this little flip play. Let's run a little flea flicker here. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's get everybody on the offensive line a touchdown today. Why not?
Yeah.
The Cowboys can't do anything. Let's do it.
Exactly. But I think the Vikings just need to adopt a mentality of who cares? Just keep scoring. Score every play if you can, and it shouldn't matter that you don't want to win by 100 to embarrass somebody. Not that I think the Vikings are a team that are holding back, otherwise they'd be winning by 100 every week. I just think they need to get rid of that mentality of, okay, we need to coast here, we need to bleed clock. No, just go. Just score points. Who cares?
So I looked it up. At this point last year, no bye week, Vikings were 2-4. They played the Bears. Do you remember what happened? Do you remember what we were doing that night that they played the Bears? I'm pretty sure this was what I'm remembering it to be.
Oh, man, you're going to have to remind me.
Pretty sure it's the first night we did a live stream.
Oh, no.
Or was that the Broncos game?
I thought the Broncos was the
that was
Tom Grossi game.
Was it the Broncos?
I'm pretty sure. I might be wrong. I'm okay with being wrong, but I'm pretty sure the time that Tom Grossi rated us was during the Broncos game, because that was a Thursday night, and we were just kind of testing it out.
You might be right. Maybe we did the Bears the week after that. We did a Bears
stream
game.
A Bears game,
and we also did the Raiders game.
Oh yeah. Oh, that Raiders game. What a 3-0 pile of garbage that game was.
Anyways, the Vikings were 2-4 through 6 games last year. They're 5-0 through 5 games after week 6.
Yep.
This year, big difference, big change. But I think you're right. A lot of it has to come down to coaching, and even despite that record last year, the Vikings clawed their way back. And I made a video last year on our account where I was going through the playoff machine and trying to figure out like what's the path to the playoffs for the Vikings, because it was still in the cards. It was a long shot, but it was still in the cards.
Well, and you were kind of doing it in jest, but at the time it was still mathematically possible for the Vikings to end up with the number 1 seed.
Yep.
Obviously, you were helping the Vikings a lot by making all the other teams lose.
But that's the beauty of something like that.
Yeah. But mathematically, even somewhat late in the season, after the halftime of the season, the Vikings had a mathematical shot at not only the playoffs but a high seed. And then obviously everything broke down, and the injury to Kirk really showed its teeth, and you can't hold on as long. So the Vikings ended up missing the playoffs. But yeah, it's kind of crazy how even on a down year, there's still a little bit of hope. And this is not a down year. And I think I need to try to keep convincing myself that it's not a down year, while also keeping myself from like getting my hopes up, because this team has hurt me before. And if you're listening to this, if you're a Vikings fan, this team has hurt you before, and we all know how it feels, and it sucks. But right now, there's nothing to complain about. The team is good, and the Vikings are going to the playoffs.
I think one